Well, as you can see, I'm wearing my white shirt again tonight. If you remember the last time I did a YouTube upload, I was wearing a white shirt and I told you why. The reason is that on white shirt nights, my intent is to tell you a little more about my wife than I do myself. I realize that I'm going to get mixed up in the storytelling as well, because what I'm going to tell you about her is through my perceptions and my experiences with her, and so it's somewhat about me too. But my intent is to give you an insight into our relationship, how it developed, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do that to the degree that I'd like to, but maybe I can with the Lord's help. She's very deserving, and she is camera shy. She would never do anything like this herself. I know it for a fact. It's hard to even get a picture of her because she doesn't like pictures. So I'm going to try to do it, and I want her to be seen as a partner in all this, because that's definitely what she's been for what's going on now to be 57 years. You know, you think back, 57 years out of a person's lifetime, even if that lifetime is getting along like mine is at age 75 now, is a lot of years. It's a lot of my life, especially when you factor out the youthful days of your life. She's pretty much been a part of me my whole adult life. And I'm not going to be able to do justice to her contribution to everything that's happened to me and to our family and others. But I'm going to make a stab at it here and there, and that's when I'll wear the white shirt. So here we go again. You remember last time I talked to you a little bit about the very first time that I laid eyes on her, and that was in Paris, Idaho, in the basement where the baptismal font was, in the basement of the stake office building. And if you remember right, I mentioned that we found out later after we were married that, hold on, we were baptized on the same night, even though our baptismal certificates didn't show it. We know they only did it once a month, and we were born the previous month. And so when we started talking about it, we could tell that she recognized me because I had to be baptized 3 times, and I think I mentioned that. But and I recognized seeing her. I can still visualize her. If I were to close my eyes and see her sitting where she was sitting, I could visualize her almost to a T. Well, like I think I mentioned, I was probably more concerned about my dad's nervousness about having to baptize me 3 times to get the job done right than I was about her. But I think it's a unique, should we say, a unique stamp that was placed on our relationship. I think in the pre-existence that we were to progress together and be together. And I think it's kind of special that we did it starting in a baptismal font. Like I said, washing our sins off in the same water, even though I know that's not how it really happens. But we were there, and we were together, and neither of us realized at that time what togetherness really meant as it pertained to the two of us in years that would come. So tonight, I'm going to bounce ahead to the next meeting that I had with her. Like I said, we grew up in different parts of the state, different parts of the valley, and we didn't run across each other at school or anything like that. I didn't know her. And I didn't remember her from the baptismal font event even, other than in reflection, as we both realized that we were there together. But the next time I would run, that I would have an experience with her is, let's see, it started in an English class when I was in high school. I would have been 16 years old. And I was sitting in Alfred Hart's English class. I don't mean to downplay him, but his classes were not all that interesting to me. And he had kind of a monotone voice, and I'm sure he was a good teacher, but anyway, I don't think I appreciated it at that point in time. And so as a 16-year-old, I had been driving for a little bit. I can still remember taking my driver's education class a year earlier, maybe a year and a half earlier, because in Idaho back in those days, you could actually start driving when you were 14 years old. I know here in Utah now, you have to be 16, but back then, at least in Idaho, you could drive when you were 14. And I think a lot of the reason for that was because a lot of the kids were in rural areas and they needed to drive to help with the farm work. And so anyway, that was the rule. But before you did that, you had to take a driver's education course. And I can remember sitting in that driver's education course and having some pretty memorable moments. The teacher that we had was a gentleman that originated in, at least his family did, in Lake Town. I'm trying to think of his last name, but I can't think of it right now. But he ended up teaching down at Fielding High School, and they selected him to teach the driver's education courses, which were taught after school. They weren't taught during the school day. So we'd go into his room, and a couple of things that I can remember about that is that he passed around some pictures quite often of automobile accidents, wrecks that had taken place, and we were required to search out on our own some stories about accidents related to automobiles, and then we had to give oral reports about those accidents and what caused them and what the results of the accidents were and different things. And I can remember being quite alarmed that an automobile could cause so much grief if it wasn't handled properly and it wasn't treated with a little respect as far as the driver goes, which I'm sure was the intent of the driver's ed teacher. And long story short, I passed the course and took my test at the courthouse and was able to get my driver's license. I would have been about halfway into my 15th year, because I think it was in the spring of the year after I turned 14, so I would have been into my 15th year, I think, when I took that course and passed it. And I didn't do much driving after that, other than maybe I drove to church, or I drove out in the fields, and I drove trucks that had maybe hay put on them that we were hauling, mostly farm work. And I didn't drive too much in the winter months. I think it was a little unnerving to my parents to have us drive when the roads were slick, and there was not a lot of need. So we kept it fairly simple, and I didn't demand to drive a lot. But it was when I was 16, into my sophomore year in high school, that I had the next meeting with my wife. Now, I mentioned the English teacher and that I was in his class. The reason I mention that is because it was in his class that I next heard her name mentioned. And my friend and I were sitting in the class, some other friends too, but I remember just discussing with him a little bit about what he had done this last weekend and what he was going to do. And we were talking about the ins and outs of our activities on the weekends. And he told me that he had dated a girl from Laketown, which of course is where my wife is from, and told me her name, and said, yeah, I've dated her, but she's not my type. I can't remember how the discussion went exactly, but she's not my type, and I don't want to date her anymore. And anyway, that's kind of how the story went there in the English classroom. But I did retain her name in my memory for some reason. I asked a question or two about her, and I remember him saying, you ought to take her out sometime. And I thought, well, that was kind of strange that he'd say that about somebody that he dated and kind of rejected, I guess, in his own way. But that was in the spring of the year. I would guess it to be late March, early April of my sophomore year in high school. And I was 16 years old. And by then I was driving a little more, but I can remember not too long after that, maybe a week after that, we were in a group again in the gymnasium there at Fielding High School. And after lunch hour, we were talking, and some of the guys that I palled around with a little bit were just looking for something to do that weekend. I guess that's what teenage boys do, is look for something to do on the weekend. But one of them said, hey, I think there's a dance up to Laketown. Well, Laketown wasn't even in our school district, and it wasn't even in our state. And besides that, it was about 35 miles up the road along the lake before you could get there. But somehow, even with the chores I had to do, I was able to get myself in a situation where I decided I'd go with these guys. There were, I think, 3 others, maybe 4, and I don't remember exactly their names. I remember some of them, but it's not pertinent right now. I won't name all their names. But we drove up there, and the dance that we were going to, if I remember correctly, was after a ball game type of dance. I don't know if it had a name like a freshman hop or whatever. I don't think so. But I can remember we drove the 35 miles or 30 miles or so that it was up there. And we just talked about the things boys talk about at that age, and girls. And I can remember some of them saying, you know, it might be kind of nice to get up here where there's some girls we haven't seen before. Maybe we'll find some we like or something like that. I don't know how the discussion exactly went, but something typical to that. Anyway, we pulled into Lake Town and found the school, parked, and walked into the gymnasium with these guys that I'd gone with. I didn't do the driving. And I remember walking in the gymnasium, and as I was walking in fact, it was earlier than that, even on the way up there, this girl that my friend had mentioned in the English class mentioned my wife's name, and her name is Lorraine. She was a Pugmire. And the Pugmire name kind of rang a bell with me because Pugmire was a very common name for anyone living in the St. Charles area would know quite a few Pugmires. That's kind of where that name must have originated. And there were a lot of Pugmires in the St. Charles area, which was about 15 miles north of the school, or south of the school. But maybe not quite that far. But that her name came to my mind, and I thought, wouldn't it be something? Maybe I'll be there. Maybe I'll be able to meet this girl that my friend told me about. Well, I went inside the gymnasium, and they had the lights. The dance was already in progress, and they had the lights kind of turned down back in those days, and I guess still it wasn't a big deal or the most desirable thing for people to dance with full lighting. You had to kind of tone the lights down to where you could kind of barely see each other. Then it was okay to dance. And they always had a kind of sawdust stuff that they'd throw out on the floor so that your shoes would, I guess, get on that and not scratch the floor up so much when you were dancing. Well, we went in the gymnasium, and I'm not sure how we came across to the locals there because they might have thought we were just looking for trouble or something, but we weren't. We were just observing. And we came in through the doors. I don't remember paying a ticket. I don't know whether the dance was far enough along that they stopped taking tickets or what, but I don't remember paying a ticket. But we walked through the door, and then there wasn't any readily available seats right by the door anyway. So I remember we all went in, the 4 of us or 5 of us, and we kind of leaned against the what would have been the north wall of the gymnasium, and kind of looked out over the dance floor, and from there you could kind of see over to the bleacher section, and there were people out there dancing, and we started to get some kind of, usually we got some kind of strange looks like who are those guys? We haven't seen them before, and that kind of thing. At least we imagined it. And I can remember leaning against the wall there, and the thought came to my mind, I wonder if I know this girl, if I saw her. Well, it just so happened that this friend that I was in the English class was part of our group. And then it dawned on me that if I wanted to know who she was, I could just go ask him, even though he'd kind of moved on to different girls or was in a quest for a different relationship. I don't think he dated her more than once or twice. But I thought, I'll just ask him. So I did. I says, so which one is she? And he looked a little bit because it was quite dark in the gym, and finally he located her, and she was sitting on the front bench of the bleacher section, roughly halfway down, maybe not quite halfway. And I just kind of sat there and looked, and finally I I got up enough courage. It actually kind of surprised me because I wasn't a real courageous kind of guy when it came to searching out girls. But I decided that I would go over to her and ask her to dance at least and get to know her. I thought, well, what could it hurt? I've made a trip up here. I might as well get to know her. So I went over and asked her to dance, and she was all right with that. She walked with me out onto the dance floor. Now, you have to kind of keep in mind the difference in our heights. I was 6 feet 2 inches tall. I was the center on the basketball team, even at that height. I realize they have them a lot taller these days, but I was 6 feet 2, and I wasn't a real heavy set kid, but I was broad. I've always been broad-shouldered. So I don't know how she viewed me as I was walking over there to her, but she said yes, and she was about 5 feet 4 inches, if I remember right. At the very most 5'5". So I was quite a bit taller than she was, and we went out and we danced. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what kind of dance are we talking about here? Well, back in those days, there was only a couple of ways that you danced, at least at those casual dances, and one of them was you kind of did a version of the Western swing when you danced. We didn't waltz or do the foxtrot or the cha-cha or anything like that. But the other version of the dance is when you just get closer to each other and kind of put your arms in dance position, and sometimes the girls would put their arms up around your neck a little bit, at least if they liked you somewhat. And so we danced. And I don't remember exactly how many dances we did, but I didn't dance with anybody else that night, and neither did she, of course. And so we got to know each other a little bit, who we were, where we were from, what our backgrounds were. There was a member of one of my, he's actually a double cousin. His father and my father were brothers, and his mother and my mother were sisters that had married into her family line, one of her uncles, and one of her uncle's daughters. And so when I told her who I was, there was a little conversation piece there. And I can't remember what we really talked about, but it was small talk. But there was something about her that I just gravitated towards, and it was the way she looked at you, the way she looked at me. It was like a eye-to-eye contact, and she had a certain smile that she would use that it's hard to describe. I probably should say that her smile was modified somewhat because she had the crooked teeth thing and the braces going on, and so she was self-conscious, I'm sure. But even at that, her smile was unique, and the way she looked at you. And I could tell she was glad that I asked her to dance. Well, pretty soon the night wore on and the dance was over, and I took her back over to the bleacher seat where I picked her up, and I went home with my buddies, and that was the end of that. But I couldn't help but get her off my mind, and it wasn't too long after that that I had this idea that I should follow up, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And then I found out that their high school, Northridge High School was the name of the high school that she went to, that their high school was going to have a junior prom, which was kind of the big dance of the year. Now, I think I said I was 16. I was actually 16 into my junior year. I think I said I was a sophomore. It was actually my junior year because, like I said, we were born in the same month, and she was going into her junior prom. So I've got that detail wrong, but I've corrected it now. So I was into my junior year, and or at least would be, and I remember getting this idea that I should talk to her about going to the prom. Well, she was a junior, and I decided the only way I'd ever really know was if I called her up. And so I found out from some friends what her telephone number was, and I called her up. And I need to explain something here because it was kind of unique. I found out that in order to speak to somebody in Lake Town from where I lived, you had to go through operators. Now, this seems a little strange even for me because that particular town was behind the times. The phone in her house was one of those old wooden box phones, and it had a speaker on part of it and a handheld thing on the other part for the ear, and some dials. And when they got a phone call into the house, it wouldn't be like ring, ring, ring. It would be like two short rings and a long ring, or two longs and a short, or three longs, or whatever. And the reason it was like that is because the operator downtown, her name was Lucy Willis, was actually operating the phone board, and she was plugging you in as a call came in. She'd plug it into the right house and give them the two shorts and a long, or whatever the signal that was for that house. And if you're in another house and heard it, well, then you'd know not to pick it up. So it was a little bit of an archaic phone system. But I called and was able to get a date for the prom, get her to say yes, that she would go to the junior prom with me. And then I can remember feeling pretty good about that, and I said, well, thank you. And anyway, I hung up, and then it wasn't too long after that my parents said, or I think it was maybe my older sister said, hold on, did you ask her what color of dress she was going to wear? Well, I was pretty naive to junior proms and semi-formal dances even. And I didn't realize that it was common to buy corsages and that kind of thing to match the girl's dress color. So anyway, I ended up having to call back and ask her what color her dress was. And I can still remember It must have been even more of a relay to the phone system that on that particular day, because my voice got transferred to an operator in Logan, Utah. So I would say, "What color is your dress?" And then the Logan operator would patch through to the operator in Laketown, who was also, who I just told you about. And she would say, "What color is your dress?" And then the Laketown operator would tap into their house and say, "What color is your dress?" And she would say, "Pink." And then the Laketown operator would say to the Logan operator, "Pink." And then the Logan operator would say back to me, "Pink." Now, I know that makes us sound really old, and I guess we are, because that's real. That's the way I found out what color of corsage I needed for her dress. Well, I finally got the corsage and went to her house and picked her up for the prom. And it was quite the experience. I talked about her look and the way she smiled, and anyway, and the way she looked that night to me was just special. And she put her arms around my neck and made me feel really special. I don't know whether just exactly how that works or worked, but I truly did feel special. And I came away from that first date at junior prom thinking, here's somebody that really likes me. She acts like she really likes me. And I felt like I really liked her. And I can remember after the prom, we drove around town a bit, and I don't know whether I should insert this or not, but we drove around town a bit, and she wanted to show me the town because Laketown's not all that big. And we drove around town, and she'd say, "Let's go up this road. I'll show you who lives here, show you where this goes or that goes." And we've teased each other since that she took me to a lot of dead-end roads, if you know what I mean. Well, I said, you did that on purpose. And she says, "No, I didn't, and you shouldn't have stopped." And anyway, turned the key off or whatever just because it was a dead-end road. But I did. I'll confess. Anyway, it started to get along, and it was fairly late at night, and I took her home. And I took her to her back porch. And it would be one of many times that I would go see her, and we would end up saying goodbye to each other on that back porch. But let me explain about that back porch. There was about an 8 or 9 inch step getting up to it. Well, I told you she's 5'4" and I'm 6'2", but you add 8 inches to that, and she was right up eye level. Whatever it took to get her at eye level, that's how big the step was, and she would be able to look at me right at eye level. And so now those eyes and that smile together, I think the best way to say it is it did a number on me, because she absolutely made me feel like I was special to her. And maybe I took it for a lot more than it was actually meant to be. but that was the reality to me. She looked in my eyes. She would put her arms around me on my neck, tell me goodbye, look at me and give me that smile, and then turn and walk into the house. I would go out and get in the car and go home. That was repeated, like I said, a lot of times in the weeks and days and weeks to come. And I think if there was one special moment of the times that we were together, that would be it, is that goodbye on her back porch with her elevated, looking at me right in the eye and smiling and giving me a hug and telling me goodbye, be careful driving home, and that kind of thing. So essentially that was our second and third meetings. And I was somewhat hooked already. Good grief. I'm too young, I realize. And I've told that to my grandkids, kids and whatever, that just because I was young and smitten didn't mean they should be. But at the same time, I've thought, holy cow, there was something to that. And it was special. It's the kind of thing that you think about during the week and that you reflect back on when you're asleep at night or going to sleep at night. And I can tell you more about the times we've had together, and I will. But I wanted to kind of get the whole affair kind of kicked off the way it actually happened, or at least as close as I could remember. And it was very special to me. She found her way into my heart quite easily. And I've often asked myself, why? How come so easily? And the only answer I can come up with is because God wanted it to be that way. So I accepted that, kind of figured it myself. And I'll tell you some other stories on another day, but those are the beginnings of our relationship and of my feelings toward her that were beyond just the kind of feelings that I had to the average girl or person on the street. And I knew there was something there. Maybe it's the way to say it, and leave it for tonight. Hopefully you'll benefit from some of these words that I'm using, because it's really quite tender to me. It's meaningful, and when I think back on it, like I've had to tonight, when I retell this kind of thing, that the memories just kind of flood in, and they're sweet memories. Well, I'm sweet on you as well, so a different kind of sweet maybe, but still sweet. Have a good night. Remember that you're loved, because love is how they say it. Love makes the world go around. And I've come to find out that that's quite literal. I'll talk to you about that another day. Good night. Sleep tight.